The fluorescent tube above the register had been flickering for 3 days. Nadia Osman had been meaning to replace it since Tuesday, and now at 11:47 on a Friday night, she was still meaning to do it while the strip of pale light stuttered above her head like a dying pulse. The store was empty. It was always empty this late, which was why she worked the close. Her brother Tariq opened at 6 in the morning and she closed at midnight, and between the two of them they had run the place for 9 years without a day off they hadn't planned for. That was the kind of business their father had built, and the kind of people he had raised. The kind who stayed. The bell above the door chimed, and she looked up expecting the Calloway kid from the apartments on Merchant, who came in every Friday night for a 2-liter soda and a bag of chips his mother didn't know about. It was not the Calloway kid. The man who came through the door was wearing a gray hoodie pulled up over his face, and his right hand was already inside the front pocket, holding something shaped like certainty. He walked directly to the counter without browsing, without hesitating, without doing any of the things ordinary people did when they walked into a store. His eyes were visible above the neck of the hoodie, and they were flat and practiced. And when Nadia looked into them, she understood immediately that this was not the first time, and she was not the first person. "Empty it," he said. "All of it. Don't make it something else." Nadia's hands were on the counter. She kept them there. She was 31 years old and had grown up behind that counter, and she had never been robbed before. Not once in 9 years, but she had imagined it. She had imagined it the way you imagine bad things, running the scenario in the back of your mind not because you believe it will happen, but because the mind runs its own insurance, its own quiet preparation. What she had imagined was panic. What she felt instead was a strange, narrow calm, like a hallway with no doors. Her hands moved to the register. She opened the drawer. There was $412 in it. She knew the exact figure because she had counted the till at 10, and nothing significant had come through since. She started pulling bills. She did not look at the security camera mounted above the cigarette display in the corner, but she was aware of it the way you are aware of something you have been told is important. Tariq had installed it himself 2 years ago, a Saturday in March, standing on a step stool with a drill and a level and the kind of focused silence that was her brother's version of prayer. He had set it to a 30-day rolling archive. He had told her where the login was written down, on the inside cover of the blue binder under the counter, in case she ever needed it. The man took the bills without counting them. He shoved them into his pocket, and for one long second he did not move, and Nadia understood that second as a calculation. She did not look away from his eyes. She held his gaze with the same flat steadiness he had brought in through the door, and whatever he found there was apparently not worth the additional cost, because he turned and walked out, and the bell above the door chimed again, and then she was alone. She stood behind the counter for 30 seconds without moving. Then she reached under the counter for the blue binder, opened the inside cover, and read the number written there in her brother's careful block letters. Then she called Tariq. He answered on the second ring. It was nearly midnight, and she had expected grogginess, the thick voice of a man pulled from sleep, but Tariq Osman sounded the way he always sounded, which was awake and already doing the math. She told him what had happened. She kept her voice even. She told him she was fine. The camera had recorded everything the man had left. Tariq was quiet for 3 seconds. "Lock the door," he said. "Don't call the police yet. I'm coming." She was going to ask him why he was saying not yet, because Tariq was the careful one, the one who paid his taxes on time and kept every receipt in a manila envelope organized by month, the one who had never in her memory suggested doing anything that was not squarely inside the rules. But something in his voice stopped the question before it left her mouth. There was a tightness in it she had not heard before. Not anger exactly, closer to recognition. She locked the door and sat down on the stool behind the counter. The fluorescent tube above her head kept flickering. Tariq Osman was 44 years old, 11 years older than his sister, and he had been running the store at the corner of Hollister and Vance in Fresno, California, for the better part of a decade. He was a medium-built man with close-cropped hair gone early to gray at the temples and the permanently dry hands of someone who handled cardboard and coin rolls for a living. He had come to the United States from their father's home country at 8 years old and had grown up in the Central Valley heat, with the specific understanding that whatever he built, he would build with his own hands, and it would belong to no one but him. The store was that thing. It was not a large thing, but it was a complete one. What Nadia did not know, because Tariq had never told her, was that 3 years ago a man named Decker had pulled up a stool at the Iron Rail Bar 4 blocks south of the store, a bar that Tariq sometimes walked past on his way home, and Tariq had pulled up a stool beside him. The Iron Rail was not a biker bar in the tourist sense of the word. It was a real one. It was where the Hollow Road Kings kept their informal office, a Hells Angels-affiliated charter out of Fresno, with a reputation for being economical with their attention and meticulous in the allocation of their respects. Tariq had walked in because it was raining and he needed to wait it out, had sat down at the bar because there was nowhere else to sit, and had ended up spending 3 hours talking to a man named Decker Hale, who held the title of Sergeant-at-Arms for the Kings, and who had the kind of face that looked like it had been carved with different chisels on different days. They had talked about the store. They had talked about the Central Valley. They had talked about fathers and what gets passed down and what doesn't. When the rain stopped, Tariq had paid for both their drinks over Decker's objection, had shaken the man's hand, and had walked home. That should have been the end of it, except that Decker Hale had come into the store the following week for motor oil, and then the week after that for ice and coffee, and the week after that just because he was passing. Over the course of the next year, they had developed the particular friendship that forms between men who are not much alike, but who recognize in each other an equivalent weight of self-made life. They did not talk every week. They did not need to. What they had was the kind of understanding that doesn't require maintenance. Tariq pulled up in front of his own store at 12:19 in the morning. Nadia had the door unlocked before he reached it. He came in, looked at her face, and put both hands briefly on her shoulders. He held her gaze for a moment, and whatever he found there satisfied him. "Show me the footage," he said. They watched it together on the laptop under the counter. The camera angle was clean. The man's face was partially obscured by the hoodie, but his eyes were clear in the footage, and so was the shape of his jaw and the particular way he moved. The practiced forward lean of someone walking to a destination they had already mapped. There was a frame where the hoodie hood shifted slightly, and a section of his neck was briefly visible, a tattoo there, the bottom curve of something that had been inked in thick black lines. "Play it again," Tariq said. He watched it 3 more times. On the 4th pass, he paused it at the frame with the neck tattoo and leaned in close and looked at it for a long time without speaking. "You know who that is," Nadia said. It was not a question. Tariq was quiet for a moment longer. Then he said, "I think I might know someone who will." He stepped outside and made a phone call. Nadia watched him through the glass door, standing under the buzzing parking lot light, talking. The call lasted 4 minutes. When he came back in, his face was not angry. It was something quieter than anger. It was the face of a man who had made a calculation and found it resolved. "Go home," he said to her. "I'll close up." "Who did you call?" He looked at her the way older brothers look at younger sisters. when they are deciding how much is the right amount. Someone who can help, he said. Get some sleep. She went home. She did not sleep. 3 days passed. Nothing happened that Nadia could see. The store ran as it always ran. The register was short by $412, and Tariq had noted it in the ledger in his careful block letters, dated and categorized as it needed to be. The police report had been filed, and a detective named Crosby had come by on Saturday afternoon. A compact man with wire-rimmed glasses and a tired thoroughness, and he had taken a copy of the footage on a thumb drive and asked his questions in the practiced rhythm of someone who had asked the same questions enough times to have worn a groove in them. He had looked at the freeze frame of the neck tattoo and tilted his head slightly and made a note, and Nadia had watched him make the note and had understood from the specificity of his silence that the tattoo was familiar to him in a professional way, which meant the man who wore it had a history, which meant there was a folder somewhere already, which meant this folder would join it. He told her he would be in touch, and the way he said it carried no more weight than a calendar notation. Nadia had understood from the detective's manner that the footage would go into a folder, and the folder would go onto a pile, and the pile would be there when it was relevant, and might not be relevant for a long time. She had worked the Sunday close and the Monday open, in a state she could only describe as waiting, though she had not been certain what she was waiting for. The store demanded what it always demanded. The cooler restocked by 7, the coffee urns rotated, the cigarette rack faced, the lottery display tidied. She did all of it with the same deliberate thoroughness that was her default, the discipline her father had called respect for the work, meaning that the work deserved full attention regardless of what else was happening in your interior. She gave it that attention. It helped, and it didn't help. Behind the routine, the image of the flat, practiced eyes above the hoodie stayed lit in her mind like the fluorescent tube used to flicker, intermittent and impossible to ignore. On the 4th day, a man came into the store. He was not large in the way that announces itself. He was large in the way that fills a doorway without dramatics, the kind of size that has been present long enough to become simply part of the landscape of a person. He was somewhere between 50 and 60, with a gray beard that had been trimmed recently and dark eyes that moved across the store with the unhurried thoroughness of a man accustomed to assessing environments before he inhabited them. He wore a leather cut over a black long-sleeved shirt, and the patches on the vest were the ones Nadia had grown up seeing on motorcycles, along the valley highways, the death's head on the back visible as he turned to close the door behind him. The arc of lettering above and below it, the kind that declared membership in something that had existed longer than most of the buildings on this block. He walked to the counter and set both hands flat on the glass and looked at Nadia with the directness of someone who had never found a use for pretense. "Your brother called a friend of mine," he said. His voice was the kind that didn't need much volume to carry. "I'm Reyes. I run this county." Nadia looked at him. "Run it how?" she said. The corner of his mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile, but was related to one. "Run it the way that matters when the other kind of running it stops working." He glanced briefly at the camera above the cigarettes. "Tariq showed me the footage. I know the tattoo." Nadia felt something shift in her chest, a small movement like a door settling on its hinges. "You know who robbed us." "I know who that marking belongs to," Reyes said. "Same thing." He picked up a coffee from the hot rack behind him without asking. Set $3 on the counter. He looked at the store with the slow, unhurried attention of a man performing an appraisal, taking in the facing on the shelves, the hand-lettered weekly specials on the whiteboard behind the register. The small frame photograph on the wall beside the cigarette display, a family picture. A man in his 60s with close-cropped gray hair and the broad, careful hands of someone who had worked with them all his life, standing with his arm around a woman, and behind them 2 children, who were clearly Tariq and Nadia, at maybe 10 and 3. The store in the background of that photograph was this store, recognizable by the same plate glass window and the same tile floor, 9 years younger. Reyes looked at the photograph for a moment. "Your father built this place," he said. "His whole life," Nadia said. Reyes nodded once. "Your brother's a good man. He built something real here. Men who build real things don't deserve to have them picked at." He took a drink of the coffee. "I want you to understand something before anything else happens. This doesn't get solved with a warrant. What I do is not what the detective does. What I do is permanent in a different way." Nadia held his gaze. "What does it cost?" "Nothing," Reyes said. "That's the other difference." He left. He didn't take the receipt for the coffee. Decker Hale arrived 2 hours later. Nadia had met Decker twice before, at a charity barbecue her brother had contributed food to 3 summers back, and she recognized him immediately. The heavy-set frame, the sleeve of blue-black tattoo that ran from his left wrist to his collar, the particular economy of movement that suggested he never did anything without having already decided it was worth doing. He came in while Tariq was stocking the back cooler and waited at the counter, and when Tariq emerged, he nodded once in the way of men who have established a common language below the level of words. "Reyes wants the laptop," Decker said. Tariq went under the counter and came back with it. "He'll have something for you by the weekend," Decker said. He tucked the laptop under his arm. He looked at Nadia. "You did the right thing not moving. Keep calm, don't escalate. That's how you came through it." He paused. "Not everyone does." He left. That was Thursday. On Friday afternoon, the store was quiet, the long summer heat pressing against the plate glass windows and the refrigeration units, working overtime against it, and Nadia was pricing a new shipment of canned goods when the bell above the door chimed, and a young man came in who stopped her entirely. He was maybe 20, lean and quick-eyed, wearing the same flat expression she had seen in the footage 4 nights ago. But the hoodie was different, and his hands were visible and empty, and she understood before he had taken 3 steps that he did not know who she was. He was browsing. He was buying something. He had no idea she had seen his eyes before. She kept her face still. She watched him pick up a sports drink from the cooler and come to the counter and set it down, and she rang it up and made change and said nothing. He left. Her hands were not shaking. She was surprised by that. She thought about calling Tariq, and then she thought about what Decker had told her, and she thought about what Reyes had said about permanent in a different way, and she picked up the phone and called Tariq. "He was just here," she said. Tariq was quiet. "Buying a drink," she said. "He doesn't know I know him." "He will by tomorrow," Tariq said. She didn't ask what that meant either. What Decker Hale had done with the laptop was send the footage to a man the Kings called Cypher, a 28-year-old from Modesto named Joel Reeve, who had grown up in the club's orbit through his older brother and who had discovered somewhere in his teens that he had a particular gift for finding things in digital places that people believed they had hidden. Joel had no criminal record. He worked a legitimate job at a network security firm, and he donated his other skill set to the Kings because the Kings were family, and family was not transactional. Within 6 hours of receiving the footage, Joel had identified the tattoo as belonging to a man named Garrett Cole, 23, who had 3 prior arrests in Fresno County, 2 of which were for robbery, none of which had resulted in conviction. The third was for assault. The charges in all three cases had been reduced or dismissed through a combination of slow processing, witness reluctance, and the particular fatigue that settled over understaffed public defenders and prosecutors alike when the cases were not high-profile enough to justify the friction. What Joel also found, and included in the summary he printed and delivered to Reyes in a sealed envelope, was that Garrett Cole had been fired from 2 prior jobs for theft, and that both terminations had been handled quietly by employers who had not wanted the friction of a formal complaint. He lived alone. He had no close family in the area. He was not affiliated with any group that would constitute a complication, which was the specific absence of complication that Reyes had been checking for, because the Kings did not move on situations where movement might create a larger disruption than the original problem. This was simple, self-contained, and clean, the kind of situation that resolved without leaving a mark on anything that mattered. Garrett Cole lived in a complex on the south end of Hollister, which meant he had robbed a store 4 blocks from his own apartment and had walked home afterward. He worked occasionally at a car wash on the industrial stretch near the rail yard. He had no known affiliations. He was not, as far as anyone could determine, connected to anyone or anything that would constitute a complication. Reyes received this information on Friday evening. He sat with it for a moment in the back office of the Iron Rail, the same back booth where the Kings conducted the quieter part of their business, and he looked at the printed summary Joel had prepared, and he made the calculation that was his to make. The calculation was not about force. The Kings had not built their reputation in the Central Valley on force alone. They had built it on the understanding that certain things, once demonstrated, did not need to be demonstrated again. What Garrett Cole had done was walk into the wrong building in the wrong neighborhood and take money from the wrong family. And now the full weight of that miscalculation was in the process of arriving at his door without his knowledge, which was precisely how such weights should arrive. Saturday morning began ordinary enough. Nadia opened at 6. The breakfast rush, such as it was, came and went. The Calloway kid's mother came in for cigarettes at 8:30, and Nadia sold them to her and thought briefly about the 2-liter soda and the bag of chips and the small ongoing negotiations of ordinary life. The heat had broken overnight, and the morning was cool, and the store felt clean in it. The refrigeration units running at normal instead of overtime, the fluorescent tube above the register finally replaced, because Tariq had brought a new one Wednesday, and she had put it in Thursday morning before the open. At 9:15, she heard them. It was not a loud sound. It was the specific low resonance of multiple engines in close formation, the way a chord is distinct from a single note, a layered sound that carried differently than traffic. She had grown up in this valley, had heard that sound on summer rides along Highway 99, had always registered it with the particular awareness of the ordinary civilian. Respectful distance, don't stare, keep moving. This morning the sound was not passing. It was slowing. It was stopping. She came out from behind the counter and looked through the plate glass window. There were 12 motorcycles arranged in a loose arc in the parking lot, the chrome catching the morning light in thin, bright lines, the riders shutting their engines in a sequence that produced a descending stutter of silence. At the head of the formation was Reyes, his gray beard catching the light the way the chrome did, his leather cut facing her as he dismounted, the death's head patch on the back turning toward her as he stepped off the bike and planted both feet on the asphalt, with the careful deliberateness of a man who knows exactly what space he occupies. Decker was to his left, arms crossed, the sleeve tattoo dark against the morning light, his expression carrying the particular economy of a man who had seen this kind of mourning many times and understood its weight. The rest of them fanned out behind in the patient, unhurried way of men who had done this before, and knew the value of stillness as a statement. The store was empty of customers. The parking lot held only the 12 Harleys and the men who had ridden them, and the scale of the formation was what struck Nadia most. Not the individual size of any one of them, but the collective mass of it. The way the arc of chrome and leather and quiet, focused stillness filled the lot from the street lamp to the dumpster enclosure, and made the space feel smaller and more significant than it had ever been. The Iron Rail Kings, in their full formation, on a Saturday morning in September, in front of a convenience store on Hollister Avenue in Fresno, California. She had the disorienting sensation of watching something that was meant to be seen, that had been arranged with care for a specific audience of one. Tariq arrived 2 minutes later, his truck pulling up behind the formation, and he walked through the group of men with the particular ease of someone who had been expected, not intruding, but belonging to the edges of what was happening. He came inside and stood beside Nadia without speaking. "What is happening?" she said quietly. "Justice," he said. It was the first time she had ever heard him use that word about anything that wasn't a process. He said it the way you say something true. What happened next, she would later piece together from what Decker told her and what Reyes confirmed in his oblique way, because she was not present for it. What happened was that 6 members of the Hollow Road Kings drove to a parking lot adjacent to the car wash on the industrial stretch near the rail yard where Garrett Cole had been scheduled for a shift that morning. He arrived at 9:50 on a bicycle. He saw the motorcycles first, and he slowed, and then he saw the men on them. And by the time Reyes stepped forward, the remaining color in Garrett Cole's face had made a quiet departure. Reyes did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The morning was still cool. The industrial street empty of other traffic. The car wash sign unlit because the Saturday opener hadn't unlocked the place yet. It was just the lot, and the bikes, and the men, and Garrett Cole, standing with one foot on a pedal, and one foot on the ground, and nowhere obvious to go. What Reyes said, as Decker relayed it later with the economical precision that was his standard mode of communication, was this: a store owner on Hollister was a friend of the Kings. The store had been robbed on a Friday night. The $412 taken was a number Reyes stated with the exactness of a man reading from a ledger, which was the point. He let the number sit in the air for a moment before he continued. The digital evidence was comprehensive and was in the possession of people Garrett Cole would not enjoy meeting. There were 2 paths available to him from this parking lot. The first involved returning the money in full to the Hollister store in person today. It also involved a conversation with the detective who was expecting his call, a call that the detective would receive whether or not Garrett Cole made it voluntarily. The difference being that voluntary carried its own particular weight with the people who made decisions about what happened next. The second path Reyes did not describe in detail. He left it as an open space in the conversation, a gap that Garrett Cole's imagination was free to furnish. Garrett Cole was 23 years old and had 3 prior arrests and had survived the particular mathematics of that life by understanding when a wall was a wall. He looked at Reyes and at the men behind him, and at the chrome and the leather and the death's head patches, and he understood that whatever calculation he had made on a Friday night 4 days ago had been catastrophically incomplete. He said he would go to the store. Reyes told him he had 2 hours. Nadia was behind the counter when he came in at 11:20. He was alone and on foot. He had $420 in an envelope, 20 more than he had taken, and he set it on the glass counter without speaking. His face was the face of a man who has looked clearly at a thing and found it larger than himself. He did not make excuses. He did not explain. He set the envelope down, and he looked at Nadia for a moment and then looked away. Nadia picked up the envelope. She counted it without hurry. She was 31 years old and had built her composure out of necessity, and she was not going to spend it here. She put $412 in the drawer and set the remaining $8 back on the counter. "For the trouble," she said. He looked at the $8. "Take it," she said. He hesitated. Then he took it. "I'll be calling the detective," she said. "Today, I want you to understand that what I tell him will be accurate. I'll tell him you came in and returned the money and that you made it right." She held his gaze. "I won't tell him anything else. But he will be getting my call." Garrett Cole nodded. He left the store. The bell above the door chimed. Outside, the motorcycles were still there. Nadia watched through the window as he walked out into the parking lot and stopped short, apparently having expected them to be gone. Reyes was leaning against his bike with the patience of a man who has learned that patience is simply accuracy applied to time. He said something to Garrett Cole. Garrett Cole nodded. Reyes pointed toward the road in the direction of the police precinct on 4th Street, which was approximately 6 blocks north. Garrett Cole turned and started walking. Nadia thought about Decker's words. Not everyone comes through it. She thought about what Reyes had said about permanent in a different way, and she thought about the specific mercy of a man who could have made this morning into something else entirely and had chosen not to. She did not know if it was mercy or something more calculated. She suspected it was both, and that in the world Reyes inhabited, the distinction was less meaningful than she had always assumed. Tariq was standing in the door between the store and the back storeroom. He had been there for the last few minutes watching. "You gave him the $8, he said. "He took it." Tariq was quiet for a moment. Dad would have done the same thing. Nadia did not answer that. It did not require one. Reyes came in. He was alone. The other bikes had departed, while she had been watching Garrett Cole walk north, and the parking lot held only his Harley now, the chrome throwing back the late morning light in a long, slow gleam. He poured himself a coffee from the hot rack, an automatic gesture, the movement of a man who considers himself at home in any room he has decided to enter. He looked at the space where the envelope had been, now empty. "He gave it back," she said. "Plus 8. Reyes nodded. He did not look particularly surprised. "Crosby's going to get the call." "Yes." He looked at her for a moment with the appraising directness she was beginning to recognize as his natural mode. "You know this doesn't close everything. The detective takes it from here." "I know. The system might still find a way to make it small," he said. "It usually does," she said. He almost smiled. "Not always." He set $3 on the counter for the coffee, same as before. "You ran it clean," he said. "Didn't panic. Kept your head. That's harder than it looks." She had been thinking about that, about the hallway with no doors, the narrow calm that had come over her, when the man came through the door and she had understood what was happening. She had not known in the moment whether that calm was courage or numbness, or simply the long discipline of someone who had spent 9 years keeping the place running through every kind of difficulty. She was not sure it mattered what it was. The result was the same. "My brother built this store," she said. "My father before that." I wasn't going to fall apart in it. Reyes picked up his coffee. He held her gaze for a moment. Tariq said you were solid. He was right. He turned toward the door. You need anything in this neighborhood, you know where to call. He walked out. The bell above the door chimed. She watched him mount the Harley, started with the practiced ease of 20 years, and pull out of the parking lot in a long, slow arc onto Hollister, going south. The engine sound fell away down the street, and then it was gone. The store was quiet. The refrigeration units hummed their constant note. The new fluorescent tube above the register held its light steady and clean. Tariq came out from the storeroom and stood behind the counter beside her, and they looked together through the plate glass at the empty parking lot and the street beyond it. He came back, Tariq said. About Garrett Cole. He had help understanding the decision, Nadia said. Lots of people get help understanding decisions and still make the wrong one. She considered this. Then maybe he had enough left in him to make the right one when it was made clear. She paused. I gave him the $8 because I wanted to see if he would take it. Tariq looked at her. And? He hesitated. Then he took it. She picked up a pricing gun and turned back to the shelf she had been working before the morning erupted. I don't know what that means. Maybe it means something. Maybe it means nothing. She tagged a can. I'll let the detective figure out the rest. Tariq was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up a clipboard from under the counter and started on the inventory he had been putting off all week. And they worked the rest of the morning the way they always worked it, side by side and mostly without speaking, which was its own kind of language, the one they had learned in this store and in this family and in this valley, a language of presence and continuity, and the daily assertion that what they had built was theirs and would remain theirs. Detective Crosby called that afternoon. Nadia made her statement accurate and complete as she had promised. She told him about the return of the money and where Garrett Cole had been walking when she last saw him. Crosby was quiet in the thoughtful way of someone revising a calculation. He said he would follow up. He asked if she had any information about how the suspect had been persuaded to return to the store and return the money. She said she did not know the specifics. Crosby let that sit for a moment, and then he said he understood. And she believed him because a detective in Fresno who had worked this beat for any length of time had a particular understanding of the specific ways that certain neighborhoods resolved certain problems, and either made peace with that understanding or changed precincts. Garrett Cole was taken in for questioning that afternoon. Whether he cooperated with Crosby's questions was a matter that fell into the closed territory of the process, and Nadia did not pursue it. What mattered to her was the ledger, $412 returned, the store intact, her own equilibrium intact, the thing her father had built still standing and still hers. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning before the heat had fully arrived, a man she didn't recognize came in and bought a pack of cigarettes and a lighter. He was somewhere in his early 40s, with the close-cropped solidity of a man who had lived physically for a long time, and there was a small piece of patched leather visible at the open collar of his jacket. Not a full cut, just a scrap of the backing. He paid and took his change and then set a business card on the counter, a plain white card with a phone number and nothing else. Reyes asked me to give you that, he said, in case the neighborhood ever gives you trouble again. He left before she could respond. She held the card for a moment, then she put it in the inside cover of the blue binder under the counter, next to the camera login in Tariq's careful block letters. She would not call it unless she needed it. But knowing it was there changed the weight of the room in a way she felt in her sternum. something settled and solid where uncertainty had lived. The feeling of a door that has been latched against the wind. She went back to the pricing gun and the shelf and the regular Tuesday morning inventory, the refrigeration units humming, the new fluorescent tube casting its clean and steady light, the bell above the door waiting for the next person who would come through it. The store smelled like coffee and cardboard and the particular cool cleanness of morning before the day fills itself up. It smelled, for the first time in a long time, like safety. She breathed it in once, deliberately, the way you breathe in something you have been given and intend to keep, and then she got back to work. If this story put something solid in your chest, something that felt like righteous relief, share it with someone who understands what it means to hold your ground. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. These stories matter because the people in them are real, and the line between standing and falling is thinner than most of us want to believe.